Hi, I'm Ronen, I'm with AppsFlyer, and I'm going to present some data, some really juicy data about the Indian market, which will help you as marketers to calculate your LTV better, and also take the insight that is very actionable from this presentation. So, this is a terrible example because oil is cheap as shit right now. But data is the oil of the 21st century, right? So, we look at the app marketplace as highly competitive. I know that a lot of you operate in similar categories, whether it's shopping or e-commerce or some other type of thing. So there's very intense competition in the market, especially intense competition here in India right now. It's increasingly expensive to get users. Users are so demanding that if you don't treat them correctly, they're gone, right? And of course, organic app discovery, that's like winning the lottery, right? I mean, for you to get discovered and someone installing your app is very powerful, but there's no way that you can control it unless you're smart in what you're doing, okay? Smart in what you're doing. So the solution is to buy smart, right? As marketers, we always look at what is our LTV, right? And I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about calculating the LTV of their new app. And they said, how do I calculate my LTV? I said, well, you have to make assumptions, right? You have to look based on the data that you know. And the winner or the best retained network on Android we see is Twitter currently. And that's followed by platforms like AppLovin, Google, and of course Facebook. So power ranking is derived from two factors. One is quality. So we take the quality score, retention, LTV or monetization, and also volume. And we see that Facebook is the king when it comes to the power ranking, which is the ability to generate quality users at volume. And by the way, on Android we see that Facebook has a very big gap between the rest right now. Okay, but Google AdWords is not far behind, and of course some of our home in India grown networks. For example, we have Tyru in there, InMobi, and some others. So, yeah. Now let's look at the retention score on iOS. We see that AppLovin actually drives the best user retention in this category, followed by Tapjoy and Google AdWords. So the iOS power ranking, by the way, another data point is that there's such a gigantic gap between Android and iOS in terms of volume in this market. So I think it's around 90+% being Android in terms of the data that we're seeing. Okay, and when we're looking at iOS platforms, again, Facebook is reigning supreme here, followed by Google AdWords, AppLovin, and even Tyru falling into the top ranking category. Retention score on Android, again, this is by shopping vertical. So Twitter, once again, is driving the best user retention when we're looking at shopping, followed by Facebook and Google and GMASA'16. And so didn't you know it, one of the sponsors here at Arta is also following into that category. So congratulations to them. The power ranking on Android shopping. Here we see, again, Google is driving great results, followed by Facebook, InMobi, Adarta, and Tyru. So a lot of networks here. So what are the takeaways from this performance index? And performance index are always important to know what's actually going on. Right? So number one, Facebook is the Maharaja of India right now. It's driving the best volume. Social platforms bring the best users. So when we talk about social, we talk about platforms like Twitter. When we look at retention, okay, Twitter does have the ability to generate the most sticky users, but it actually has very little volume to it. So this is an interesting insight that we found. Google, actually, because it's very it's intent-based, it actually has one of the best abilities to drive retention and also volume. And then local being the local networks, drive the best, have the ability to drive better scale and retention. So let's look at some of the retention highlights that we're seeing as well. So this is retention on Android compared to iOS. So we see it's very, very much similar to one another. But we start to see gaps when we look at organic versus non-organic. So organic users, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is the holy grail of users that you want to be getting. And we see the gaps actually start to decrease over time. So it means that once you find the right users, you actually they tend to retain well over time. We see this again pretty similar on iOS, so there's not much difference there. We see that Android, again, as I mentioned, is a very, very dominant platform. We see 21 times more organic installs on Android versus iOS. And when we're talking about non-organic or paid acquisition, it's 43 times greater than iOS. So there's a very, very huge gap here in the market. Now let's look at Android retention by category, and we see that music apps. Anyone have a music app here? So music apps actually drive the best retention, followed by travel, news, and then we start leveling off at tools and communication. On iOS, retention is a little bit different. Social networking is much stickier, and of course gaming. Any gamers in here? We're all the gamers in India anyways. All right, and then once we look at different categories, so this is retention compared Android versus iOS, we see that travel and tools are much more sticky on Android, while we see on iOS that tools and games and shopping even tends to be have better retention. So the three takeaways on retention here is that Android and iOS are actually very similar in the way users behave. Okay? But it's very different when you look at the different platforms, different categories within the platform. So for example, comparing music to shopping to utilities to social. And then finally, there's very low buying activity going on in India right now on iOS. So most of the targeting or the paid acquisition we're seeing is being done on Android. So we just released a report as well last week about the state of in-app spending globally. And the highlights from India is that for in-app purchases, you can see here that orange is for basically it's ARPU per paying user, ARPPU. In India is around $8.78 overall, but iOS is actually, the spending power on iOS is much greater than the spending power on Android. So again, takeaways for this is that iOS users monetize 5 times better than Android users. Okay? And when those users are paying, iOS still monetizes 3 times better than Android. So obviously the paying user rules, right? He who pays, that's the cake. And then of course we see the interesting, or maybe not really interesting insight here is that spending in India is actually lower than the global index. But in Asia, we see that in-app spending is actually 40% greater than global. So Asia markets outside of India are driving up in-app purchases, but India is not yet there yet. But I think it's coming in time pretty soon. So when we talk about customer acquisition costs, you actually, as marketers, need to be measuring everything. You need to be measuring these key data points, and you need to have the ability to measure cost and revenue in one single platform that you can optimize everything, and that's kind of what AppsFlyer as a company will help you solve. So I think our critical insight for this is that you need to really, really dig deep into the data. Okay, and if you want to set your marketing on fire, how'd you like that? If you want to set your marketing on fire, you really need to be very, you need to measure, and you need to measure a lot. So one of the biggest, I would say, trends that we see in the industry today is that marketers are moving from measuring the install as the key kind of event, because this is an event that is monetizable for networks. But as a company or as someone who owns an app, that's where the journey begins for the user. So measure at will and use that data to optimize based on your goals. Thank you.